You've probably heard of the roguelike genre before. Wikipedia classifies roguelike as a subgenre of role-playing computer games traditionally characterized by a dungeon crawl through procedurally generated levels, turn-based gameplay, grid-based movement, and permanent death of the player character. However, a more modern definition could be any game where you have to complete some kind of objective using randomized resources in procedurally randomized levels, while dying causes you to have to start over from the beginning, which also randomizes your resources and levels again. So basically any game with procedural generation and permadeath. However, I'm here to argue that both this genre definition and the name itself are actually inaccurate and unintuitive, and must change, as to not do that could actually lead to people harming the design of their games. The first problem I have with the term roguelike is the same problem I have with all genres named after specific games. That is that if you don't know that game, the term is meaningless to you, in addition to not telling you anything about the mechanics of the original game either. Like, you can't just call genres after whatever games did them first. Even Doom clones were eventually renamed to first-person shooters, which is far more descriptive. So what kind of game is Rogue? And what is its genre? Rogue is a turn-based tactical dungeon crawler. The point of the game is that you are stuck in a dungeon which completely alters itself, and you are trying to get some amulet or something while you fight monsters, level up, and collect items in order to survive and make it to the end. You also collect different colors of potions and differently named spell scrolls, and every time you play, their effects are randomized. So you have to take risks by either using these items on enemies or yourself and hope that they harm enemies and help you. Of course, after you've discovered the effect of a certain item, it doesn't change until you die. Finally, Rogue was inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, which is why it shares the turn-based tactical combat and dungeon crawling aspects of that game. So really, Rogue has more in common with D&D than it has with other so-called roguelikes, like Slay the Spire, Hades, and Rogue Legacy. Meanwhile, these games have plenty of other genres they belong to. Slay the Spire is a turn-based card game, Hades is an action hack and slash, and Rogue Legacy is like Hades but is 2D and adds platforming. Also, if you think about it, D&D is also a roguelike, as it has procedural generation and permadeath. First off, the content in D&D could technically be infinite as long as your DM keeps creating new dungeons. And for permadeath, if a player dies in D&D, they are dead. Sure, sometimes they can be revived, but what if the whole party dies? That's game over. Adventure finished. You start over. Good day, sir. Then there are games like Wizardry and Dungeons & Dragons Eye of the Beholder. These kinds of games have been classified as belonging to the dungeon crawler genre. Even though, just like Rogue, these games are about getting through a dungeon, feature permadeath, turn-based combat, and even have food rations which prevent the player from farming EXP and forcing them to keep going deeper into the dungeon. Of course, the reason that these games are so similar is once again because they were inspired by D&D, just like Rogue. So why are these games arbitrarily excluded from the roguelike genre? So again, doesn't it make D&D a roguelike? Or should we rename all of these games to D&D likes? Of course, I'm not actually proposing that, as I don't think these mechanics belong to a genre or that roguelike even is a genre. However, I do think that a lot of these games people call roguelikes share a dynamic, which is the constant challenge of risk assessment. If you think about it, that's really what these games are all about. When you play Rogue, it is vital that you discover the effects of potions, but finding a safe moment to do so may be tricky. Sometimes you might be in the fight for your life with a monster, with your only way out being throwing a random potion at the enemy, hoping it harms instead of heals. Slay the Spire works the same way. Sure, you could play it safe and avoid all the elites, but then you won't get as many relics. In these games, being careful can get you far, but winning requires you to take big risks. In that sense, procedural generation and permadeath don't make the genre as much as they enhance it, as the randomness adds uncertainty and the permadeath adds higher stakes, both of which increase the tension, making the risks you take more rewarding when they pay off. Also, there's the concept of the run, a playthrough where you get just the right RNG to succeed, which can sometimes make these games feel rather arbitrary. Although this is also a big part of the fun, as the promise of getting just the right combination of items for some overpowered combo is a big reason to keep playing. I guess this is why these games are so addictive, as it has the inconsistent win effect that Skinner boxes and gambling also exploit. Even if I don't think Rogue is that similar to these modern games, that is only because they've added so many other features that they've kind of created their own subgenre. There's also the issue that people call these newer games roguelite because they have progression mechanics that may make it easier to beat them than the old school roguelikes, which were less forgiving, but I call bullshit on that, as adding progression to a game doesn't always make it easier. Slay the Spire, for example, lets you unlock new cards and relics, but they don't automatically make you stronger. Also, these newer games have more challenges for you even after the main ending, which far outclass that of Rogue's only challenge in terms of difficulty. So to say that these games are more casual compared to Rogue is just insulting. Now that that's done, let's talk about why procedural generation and permadeath aren't part of any one genre. Procedural generation isn't a genre-defining mechanic. It is a tool in the designer's toolbox, used for content creation. A game that uses a lot of procedurally generated content is going for a breadth of content, while a game that uses next to none is going for quality of content. It's the difference between quality and quantity. Even a game like Rogue Legacy doesn't have true procedurally generated content, as you'll see the same rooms repeated over and over, just in different positions with different enemies and loot. Games like Minecraft and Diablo also use procedurally generated levels, but instead of using them to add to the challenge of making the player work with what they're given, these games use it to add more variety to the world and cater more to the explorative aspects of the games. Besides, both Minecraft and Diablo have hardcore modes where dying equals permanent loss of your character or access to the server, which means that both these games technically qualify as roguelikes. This again shows how easy it is to qualify for this genre title. If simply changing a game's difficulty mode changes its genre, then that genre has something wrong with it. That's a good segue into the next section, as permadeath is really nothing more than a difficulty setting. Just like procedural generation, permadeath is a tool in the designer's toolbox, which any game can make use of if a designer chooses to use it. It allows the designer to tune how difficult their game is. Okay, so when a player makes mistakes, a designer has a couple of choices when it comes to punishing the player. This punishment usually comes in two forms: a loss of progress or a loss of resources. How much of these two a player loses when making mistakes defines how punishing the game feels, which players usually experience as a feeling of difficulty. It may surprise you to hear that most games use both of these. You may think that a game like Mega Man only uses a loss of progress, as dying results in being sent back. However, Mega Man's health and lives also count as resources. When Mega Man gets hit, he loses his health resource, while also being pushed back a little, which can lead to death when falling down a pit. This is somewhat forgiving as it allows Mega Man to survive a few hits before being punished more severely. When he loses all his health, he gets sent back to the last checkpoint, while also losing his life resource. If he dies while out of lives, he's punished more severely by being kicked out of the level, equaling more progress loss. Of course, there are also games that only use one of the two. Kirby's Epic Yarn punishes the player with a loss of resources, but otherwise just puts them back on the stage. This will feel very generous if your only goal is getting to the end of the stage, but for players who want to use the resources, it equals having to spend more time gathering more of that resource. Dark Souls takes the player's progress, souls, and humanity, and if they die again before recovering their souls, they lose those too. This gives the player a chance to avoid the loss of resources. Additionally, it has the Ring of Life protection for people who want a less punishing experience. Ironically, there are also games where permadeath only affects resources and not progress. In Fire Emblem, XCOM, and even Pokemon Nuzlocke, your party members can die permanently. But this doesn't affect your progress in the game, only your chance to beat it, as your party members are your resources. Pokemon Nuzlocke also highlight how any game can have permadeath if the player decides to enforce it themselves. How can a mechanic that's so easily added be the representation of genre? Finally, the game that has the most well-designed punishment system is Wario Land 3. In this game, Wario doesn't have health and he can't die. Instead, when he gets hit, he gains some kind of status, which restricts movement in some way. Like when he gets hit by this enemy while climbing his ladder, he gets cut in half, making him fall off the ladder. But otherwise, he's free to try again. This means that climbing the ladder has to be done perfectly, but failing to do so isn't that punishing. This is the opposite of Mega Man, where getting hit while on the ladder just takes some health, allowing the player to tank the hit, which is more forgiving in a moment, but more punishing if the lost health results in dying on the boss. This is a big problem in most older games, where a player would have to retry challenges they already beat, just to get another chance at the hard part. Wario Land fixes that by being more challenging in the moment, while still giving the sense that the game is not that hard. Another great example is when Wario needs to climb this palace, But there are zombies which in a single hit turn Wario into a zombie, which means that when he jumps he falls through semi-solid platforms, forcing him to drop all the way down to retry the climb. The interesting thing is that in earlier levels, turning into a zombie was necessary in order to solve puzzles. Wario Land 3 is full of these transformations, which are a benefit in some situations and a burden in others. Finally, there are the boss fights. In most of these, defeating the boss is rather easy, as they only take a few hits, but if Wario gets hit just once, he has to retry. Take this boss for example. Wario just needs to hit the barrels he's standing on 3 times, which is rather easy, but if Wario is hit even a single time, he turns into Spring Wario, and is forced to jump up the semi-solids to the top of the screen, where he gets stuck. The only way out is through the door, at which point he needs to walk back to the boss room where the fight has been reset. This creates a very volatile fight where victory and loss are both very close at all times. Designing your game like this is actually more fun, as defeating a boss after getting hit a lot doesn't feel very good. But doing so without getting hit at all feels great. A game where getting hit is inevitable feels a lot more sloppy than a game which is designed so tightly that not getting hit is not only more feasible, but encouraged. Jumping and getting over it are also good examples of games that exclusively use a loss of progress as punishment. Whoa, I kind of got carried away there explaining game design concepts. But my point is that crediting procedural generation and permadeath to a single genre is a mistake, as it limits your creativity. In general, it is a mistake for any game designer to pick a genre for their game first, and then put in all the mechanics they think belong to that genre. Make your game first, put whatever mechanics in it you think will make your game better, and then think about which genres your game fits in. Genres exist to talk about games, not as a blueprint to follow or a corner to stuff them into. See my video on why games have multiple genres if you want to know more about that. So, then how should we call games that have been classified as roguelikes up to this point? First, I think it's better to look at the other genres a game can fit into, like platformer, card game, and turn-based tactics game. But I do think that these games have something in common, and not that they are like Rogue, but that they are about weighing risks versus rewards. So risk assessment games would be a more descriptive and helpful term to apply to them. So Rogue Legacy would be an action combat platform risk assessment game, for example, to give a rough genre description. To end this video, I'd like to notify you that this subject was originally going to be part of a larger video, where I debunk the myth surrounding the differences between Western and Japanese RPGs. Since Rogue was inspired by D&D, I had to explain that Rogue did not count as an RPG, because it did not have the role-playing D&D incorporated. It also allowed me to go more in depth on the game design behind punishment mechanics and content generation, and it also makes the other videos shorter. Anyway, thanks for watching, and subscribe for more videos on game design.